During a tense live talk show, Burkina Faso's revolutionary leader, Ibrahim Traoré, is confronted with unexpected disrespect by a smug, confrontational host. What unfolds next shocks everyone in the studio. With sharp words and an unshakable presence, Traoré turns the tables, leaving the host stunned and the audience in awe. This moment quickly went viral, showcasing his strength, dignity, and unbreakable resolve. It's Monday evening, 6:45 p.m. in Paris, at Studio 5 of the national TV station, Leo Direct. Cameras are rolling, and the crowd is buzzing. The highly anticipated episode of Favor has been teased for weeks. The guest, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, revolutionary leader and acting president of Burkina Faso. The interview was supposed to be a respectful one, but behind the scenes, tensions were rising. The host, Marc Delarme, was known for his sharp tongue, smug smirks, and veiled insults, especially aimed at African leaders. Tonight, he was ready for a fight. Ibrahim walked into the studio calmly, dressed in a modest suit with no flashy pins or decorations. Just his usual focused gaze and firm posture. He greeted the crew warmly. Marc, however, didn't stand to shake his hand. When the red light blinked on, Marc leaned forward with a cold smile. "President Traoré," he began. "Should I call you that? Or rebel commander?" the audience gasped. Ibrahim's face remained emotionless. Marc pressed on. "Tell me, do you really believe you have the experience to sit with world leaders?" What Marc didn't know was that this night wouldn't go as he planned. By the end of it, it would be Marc whose career would be forever changed. The room went quiet as Marc chuckled smugly. Expecting applause that never came, Ibrahim Traoré leaned back, his eyes not showing anger but only disappointment. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he slowly turned his gaze toward the audience, lingering on a young black girl sitting in the front row, her eyes wide with hope. Then he spoke calmly. "In my country," he began, "we don't measure a man's worth by the decorations on his chest, but by how many children sleep safely at night because of him." The room was silent. Marc shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Well, you've been accused of..." Ibrahim raised his hand politely, not aggressively, and said, "Let me finish." The audience leaned forward as he continued. "People like you think power is about wearing a tie in Paris, but real power is standing in front of your people when bullets fly and refusing to run." Gasps echoed in the room. Marc's lips twitched. As he tried to regain his composure, Ibrahim leaned forward, his voice softer now. "You ask if I belong with world leaders. I ask you, do they belong with their people?" Backstage, the control room was frozen. One producer whispered. He flipped it, while the director stared at the screen, clearly taken aback. In the studio, Marc tried to recover. "That's very poetic, President. But poetry doesn't stop terrorists." Ibrahim's jaw tightened slightly, then relaxed. "You're right," he said gently. "But dignity does. Hope does. A leader without hope is more dangerous than any gunman." Then Ibrahim did something no one expected. He pulled out a folded piece of paper from his jacket. "This," he said, "is a letter from a 9-year-old girl in Kaya. Her village was attacked. She lost her father, but she still wrote to thank me for protecting her school." His voice cracked slightly, not out of weakness, but from truth. He read the letter aloud. As he did, the entire audience fell silent, not out of fear, but in shared pain. By the time he finished, even the cameraman's hands were shaking. Marc sat there, completely lost, realizing this wasn't just a debate. It was a reckoning. The studio was still. Ibrahim sat tall, calm, and unshaken, but the tension in the air was palpable. That's when it happened. A woman in the audience, dark-skinned and simply dressed, stood up. Tears streamed down her face. "I know you," she whispered. "My father used to tell me about leaders like you, men who fight for their people, not for money." Marc tried to cut her off, but she shouted, "You sit there mocking him, but you don't know what courage looks like. You've never had to protect a village, hold a dying child, or stand alone against the world." The whole room froze. Ibrahim didn't move. His eyes locked with hers. "You're not just a guest," she said, her voice trembling. "Your hope." That word hope, Mark looked lost, fidgeting with his pen. For the first time, he realized this wasn't just politics. This was pain, history, pride. And someone had just awakened a sleeping lion. By dawn, the internet was buzzing. TikTok loops, YouTube shorts, Facebook reposts all shared the woman's words. You're not just a guest. You're hope, in over 100 languages, reaching thousands. In Ouagadougou, students marched peacefully, holding up signs that read, "Hope wears a uniform. Our voice is no longer silent." In a cafe in Paris, a little boy of African descent watched the clip on his tablet. He turned to his mother and asked, "Is he a king?" "No," she smiled, "something better. He's a servant of his people." Meanwhile, Mark's bosses were panicking. They called an emergency meeting. Sponsors were threatening to walk. Comment sections were brutal. Yet, Ibrahim Traoré said nothing. He didn't tweet. He didn't boast. Because when a lion walks, he doesn't need to roar. The studio called Ibrahim's team, asking him to return. This time we'll give him a full hour, no interruptions. But Ibrahim didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked the streets of Paris that evening, visiting a refugee shelter. No cameras, no press, just his presence. A little girl hugged him. "They said you're like magic," she whispered. Ibrahim knelt down. "No," he said softly. "I'm just a man." But magic happens when people believe in each other. At the hotel, his assistant handed him an official invitation for a second appearance. Ibrahim read it slowly, then said softly, "Tell them I accept." Pause, he added, "But this time, I'll bring my brothers with me." "Which brothers, sir?" the assistant asked. "The ones whose voices have never been invited." The second appearance wasn't just a return, it was a reckoning. This time, Ibrahim didn't walk into the studio alone. Behind him came a silent row of guests, men and women from Africa and the diaspora. A nurse from Bamako, a war orphan. From Sudan, a professor from Darfur. Each had their own story. Each had been unheard for years. Mark tried to smile, but his face twitched. The crowd noticed. Ibrahim shook his hand. "Thank you for inviting us," he said gently. "We've brought some truths with us." The air was thick with tension as they sat. The cameras rolled, and history began to rewrite itself. The nurse spoke first, holding up a photo of a burned-out hospital in Burkina Faso. "Terrorists destroyed this place," she said. "President Traoré sent supplies within 48 hours. He didn't hold a press conference. He just acted." Mark blinked, unsure of how to respond. Then the professor spoke. "My university was losing funding. He redirected his own salary for a semester to keep it running." One by one, stories poured in. No screaming, no drama, just proof. The audience sat in stunned silence, and Mark's face turned pale. This wasn't the show he had planned, and it was far from over. Then the youngest guest stood, a boy, maybe 12, nervous and small, but burning with something inside. He cleared his throat, and his French was shaky. I don't have a papa. I live in a camp." One day, President Traoré came. No cameras, no car, just him, silence. "I told him I wanted to be a soldier." He said, "No, be a builder. Build what they tried to destroy." He gave me shoes and books. The crowd gasped. The boy took out a tiny, worn-out French book from his jacket. "He gave me this," he said, and a tear rolled down his cheek. "He gave me dreams." Mark looked down. He had nothing left to say because in that studio, something bigger than ratings had arrived. Truth. Mark couldn't take it anymore. The audience had shifted. They were no longer amused. They were moved, and that frightened him. He slammed his hand on the table. "Enough of this emotional circus," he barked. Gasps filled the room. "You're a president, not a preacher. This is politics, not a sob story session." But Traoré didn't flinch. He looked at Mark calmly, then said, "Maybe you mistake power for noise. Let me show you what power really is." He pulled out a file, a live document from the Burkina Faso government. Screens lit up behind them with real-time reforms, schools reopening, farmers receiving aid. No speeches, just evidence. Mark's mouth hung open. The audience began to clap, not for show, but from the heart. A backstage assistant was secretly recording with her phone. She caught the moment when Traoré turned to Mark and said, "History won't remember insults, but it will never forget impact. Within minutes, that clip hit social media. In an hour, it had 1 million views. By nightfall, 10 million. In Burkina Faso, young boys in villages gathered around old radios, replaying every word. In France, celebrities shared the video in stunned admiration. Even critics were forced to admit, this man, he didn't shout. He simply stood. People cried watching it, not out of pity, but out of pride. Finally, a leader who didn't perform, he proved. After the broadcast, Mark stormed into the green room, his hands trembling as he poured himself a glass of water. He had underestimated Ibrahim Traoré, not just the man, but what he carried: truth, vision, pain, hope. Then the door creaked open. Traoré stepped in alone. But this time, Mark didn't speak. Traoré walked up to him and said softly, "The world doesn't need more loud men. It needs brave ones." Then, without waiting for a reply, he left. Mark sat down slowly. He looked at the now empty seat across the room. He didn't know it yet, but his life had just changed. So had millions of others. By morning, the video had reached every corner of Africa. In Ouagadougou, an elderly man wiped his eyes. "That's my president," he whispered to his grandchildren. A young girl in Paris hugged her mother. "He looks like us. He speaks with heart." In Europe, the media scrambled to spin it. Some said Traoré was too emotional. Others called him dangerous. But none could deny one truth: the people were rising behind him. At the presidential residence in Burkina Faso, Ibrahim sat silently. With his team, he wasn't smiling. He wasn't celebrating. He was thinking. Because something bigger had started, and it couldn't be stopped. Traoré's phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. He answered. A quiet voice spoke in broken French. It was Miriam, a nurse from northern Burkina Faso. "I don't know if this is really you, but thank you. My son watched your video and said, 'Mama, I want to be like him.' I've never seen him so proud to be Burkinabe." Ibrahim's voice cracked. He didn't say much, just 2 words. "Thank you." After the call, he looked out the hotel window. The Eiffel Tower shone in the distance, but his heart was in Kaya, in Dori, in the dusty streets of Bobo Dioulasso. This wasn't just about TV anymore. It was about dignity. Mark hadn't slept. He rewatched the video again and again. He had mocked a man who stood for millions. He had spoken over pain, but the world didn't cancel him. They ignored him, and that hurt more. In the studio, producers whispered about replacing him. His ratings were dropping. Then he made a rare decision. He went live again. No crowd, just him. He looked into the camera and said, "I disrespected a man who represents something I didn't understand. I was arrogant. I was wrong." The clip didn't go viral, but Traoré saw it. He smiled gently, not because he had won, but because truth had finally been heard. Across Africa, people didn't just watch the moment, they felt it. In Accra, a group of university students marched with handmade signs. "Ibrahim, you spoke for us." In Bamako, elders sat around radios, nodding as they replayed the show. Even in refugee camps across the Sahel, children mimicked his calm tone, repeating his words with pride. Burkina Faso's streets overflowed with peaceful supporters. No protests, just pride. The same youth, once hopeless, now raised their flags. Traoré hadn't spoken for applause, but the world gave him one anyway, not because he wanted it, but because he deserved it. A woman from the village of Fata wrote a letter to the presidency. She didn't expect it to be read, but it reached him. "President Ibrahim, my son died last year during a terrorist attack. We buried him with no flag. Today, I watched you on that French program. I cried not because I was sad, but because, for the first time, I felt seen. Thank you for making us proud to be from this land." A grieving mother. Ibrahim held the letter for a long time. Then, he walked alone into the hotel courtyard. He looked at the stars and whispered, "For all of them, I will not stop." 6 days after the interview, Traoré returned to Ouagadougou. No red carpet, no orchestra, but tens of thousands lined the road, not waving signs, just placing their right hands over their hearts, a gesture of silent respect. Even the children stood still. Ibrahim stepped out of the plane, looked at them, and simply nodded. No words, no speeches. He had already said enough. That single moment, a leader walking quietly into his nation with the people behind him, became the most shared video of the year. He hadn't fought with anger. He fought with dignity. And the world listened. Forever. If this story moved you, please don't scroll away. Like this video if you felt even a single tear. Comment below with one word: respect. Subscribe to this channel for more stories that celebrate truth, dignity, and African strength. And please share this story. Let the world know that men like Ibrahim Traoré still exist. Thank you for watching. Long live courage. Long live Burkina Faso.